The alarms rang through the steel corridors of the transport ship. Soldiers rushed to their stations, weapons in hand, faces tight with fear. Outside the windows, streaks of laser fire crossed the darkness like angry lightning. Humanity's convoy was under attack by the Sarek Legion, a race known for its brutal raids. But this time, they were not just after supplies. They were after someone important. Lucas Renner, a young soldier with only a year of service, found himself standing in the loading bay as orders blared through the comms. The captain's voice barked, telling everyone to hold their ground. But Lucas noticed a figure darting away from the chaos, a girl with shimmering purple skin, her long hair flowing as she ran. She wasn't human. She was the reason the Sarek Legion had come. And for some reason, she was heading straight toward him, her eyes locked on his, filled with fear but also trust, as if she had chosen him out of everyone. "They're coming," she said in a trembling voice. Before Lucas could ask who, the heavy doors at the far end exploded inward. Armored Sarek warriors poured in, their weapons aimed directly at her. Lucas's instincts screamed at him to run. Instead, he stepped forward, putting himself between her and the attackers. Blaster. Fire ripped through the air. The girl screamed. Lucas raised his rifle and fired back, but there were too many. The first shot hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second slammed into his chest, making his legs buckle. The third punched through his ribs, stealing his breath. Pain roared through his body, but he didn't fall. He planted himself in front of her like an unmovable wall. The Sarek hesitated, confused at why a human would stand in their way after taking 3 killing shots. The girl's hands were on him now, glowing faintly. He didn't know if it was fear, or some kind of alien ability, but warmth spread through his body where her fingers touched. The Sarek commander shouted something in their own harsh language, ordering his soldiers to grab her. Lucas gritted his teeth and fired again, each pull of the trigger feeling heavier than the last. His vision blurred, but he could hear her breathing behind him, and that was enough to keep him standing. They were being pushed back toward a corner. Lucas knew he couldn't hold them off much longer. Then, out of nowhere, the ship shook violently. A blinding flash lit the corridor, and several Sarek fell to the ground. Human reinforcements stormed in, shouting orders and firing with precision. Lucas collapsed to one knee, still shielding her as the attackers were driven back. The girl leaned down, her face close to his, her voice fierce. "You will not die here," she said. The medics arrived, but she didn't let them touch him right away. She spoke quickly in her own language, and one of the soldiers with her nodded and handed her a small vial. She poured its shimmering contents over his wounds. The pain dulled almost instantly, though the world still felt heavy. He could barely keep his eyes open, but he saw her looking at him with something between gratitude and determination. It was a look that told him this was far from over. As the battle outside raged on, they moved him to a secure chamber deep in the ship. The girl stayed by his side, refusing to leave even when the captain demanded she be taken to safety. Lucas didn't understand why she would risk herself like this. He was just a soldier, one among many. But as she reached for his hand and whispered something in a language he didn't know, he realized one thing. Whatever she was, whatever she meant, to the Sarek, she had now tied her fate to his. Lucas woke in the medical bay, the hum of the ship's engines vibrating faintly through the floor. The lights above him were softer here, not the harsh brightness of the corridors. He took a slow breath, expecting the pain to crush him again, but instead he felt only a dull ache. His chest was bandaged, and a faint glow still lingered where the alien girl's hands had touched him during the fight. The girl sat nearby, her posture calm, but her eyes sharp as they followed the room's every movement. She looked younger now without the fear twisting her face, but there was still something in her gaze that spoke of battles she had survived before this. Lucas wondered who she was to the Sarek and why they would risk boarding the human ship, just to take her. Her violet skin caught the light, shifting in subtle shades as she moved, making her seem almost unreal. A medic stepped in and gave Lucas a quick check, scanning his chest and murmuring in approval. "You're lucky," the medic said. "Most humans wouldn't survive one plasma round to the chest, let alone 3. Lucas glanced at the girl. She said nothing, but her lips tightened slightly, as if she knew more than she was willing to tell. When the medic left, she rose and came closer to him. "You should not have done what you did," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Lucas frowned, unsure if she was scolding him or thanking him. "I couldn't just let them take you," he replied. She tilted her head, studying him as though trying to decide if he was foolish or noble. "The Sarek will not forget this," she warned. "They will come again." He could hear the certainty in her tone, and it sent a cold weight settling in his gut. The ship's intercom crackled, and the captain's voice announced that the attackers had been repelled, but pursuit was still likely. They were adjusting course to avoid further contact. Lucas tried to sit up fully, and though his body protested, he forced himself upright. The girl watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "You should rest," she said. He shook his head. "Not while they're still after you," he answered. She hesitated before speaking again. "My name is Avara." Lucas repeated it under his breath, finding it both strange and beautiful. "I'm Lucas," he said. She gave the smallest nod, as if acknowledging a pact between them. There was a flicker of relief in her eyes, but also something else, a quiet, unspoken grief. He wanted to ask about it, but the door to the med bay slid open before he could. 2 armed soldiers entered, one human and one from a reptilian-allied race. "The captain wants both of you in the briefing room," the human soldier said. Lucas glanced at Avara, but she only rose silently and followed. The walk to the briefing room felt longer than it should have. Every corner they turned seemed to hold the echo of the earlier attack. The air still smelled faintly of burnt metal. Inside the room, the captain stood over a holographic map of the sector. Red markers pulsed where the Sarek ships had been sighted. "They want her alive," the captain said, gesturing to Avara. "That makes her both valuable and dangerous to keep on board." Avara stood tall beside Lucas, her chin lifted. "I can leave," she offered, though her voice lacked any sign of fear. "No," Lucas said firmly before the captain could respond. The captain studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "You took 3 shots for her," he said. "I'm not about to let that be for nothing." He turned back to the map. "But this changes our mission. We'll need to reach the Eridan outpost and hand her over to the diplomatic council before the Sarok find us again." Lucas caught a fleeting glance between Avara and the captain, one that told him there was more to this plan than he was being told. As they left the briefing room, Lucas felt the weight of the coming days settling on him. The Sarek would not give up. Avara's presence would draw them like predators to wounded prey. But as he walked beside her, he realized something had already shifted. Whatever their reasons, whatever dangers lay ahead, he had made a choice when he stepped between her and those blaster bolts. And he knew he would make it again without hesitation. The corridors of the ship seemed quieter now, but Lucas could feel the tension in the air. Every crew member he passed moved with quick, purposeful steps, their eyes flicking toward Avara before darting away again. She walked beside him without speaking, her head held high, but he noticed her fingers curling slightly as though she was bracing herself for something. He didn't know whether it was fear of the Sarok or distrust of the humans who now surrounded her. They reached the observation deck where the stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. Avara paused by the glass, her reflection framed by the shifting glow of distant suns. Lucas stood beside her, leaning slightly on the railing to ease the pull in his chest. "You've been in fights before," he said, watching her expression. She nodded slowly, her eyes still on the stars. "Too many," she answered. "But never one where a stranger stood in front of me like that." Her words caught him off guard. He had not thought much about his choice in the heat of the moment. "It wasn't a choice," he said simply. "It was the right thing to do." She turned her gaze toward him, studying him as if measuring the truth of his words. "Humans," she murmured, "are unpredictable. That is both your strength and your danger." Lucas wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment or a warning. Before he could reply, the ship shuddered. A low, resonating alarm began to sound through the hallways. Over the coms, a voice called for battle readiness. Lucas felt the familiar rush of adrenaline replace the calm of the moment. Avara's eyes narrowed, and she stepped back from the window. "They found us," she said without hesitation. Lucas tightened his fists, his body already aching from earlier wounds, but he knew he would fight again if needed. The captain's voice came over the comm, ordering all non-essential personnel to secure locations. Lucas looked at Avara. "That means you," he said. She shook her head firmly. "They will breach faster than you think. If they want me, I will not wait trapped in a room." Her determination made it clear she would not follow orders if they conflicted with her own survival. Lucas knew that. Trying to argue would waste time they didn't have. They moved quickly toward the armory. Lucas grabbed a rifle, checking the charge, while Avara selected a compact weapon with a grip designed for her hands. Her movements were precise, practiced. He realized again she was no helpless diplomat. She was trained and likely had fought before against worse odds than these. "Stay close to me," he told her. She didn't answer, but the slight tilt of her head suggested she would. The ship's hull rang with the distant thud of docking clamps. Avara's posture shifted instantly. Her body angled toward the corridor that led to the breach point. Lucas took position beside her, his weapon raised. The lights dimmed for a heartbeat before emergency strips along the walls flared to life. The sound of metal tearing reached them, followed by the hiss of pressurized air. Then the Sarek came. Through, they were larger than most humans, their armor segmented and dark with crimson markings. Their weapons gleamed under the emergency lights. Lucas fired first, his shot hitting one in the shoulder and spinning it sideways. Avara fired next, her aim deadly and controlled. The corridor erupted into chaos, energy bolts slamming into walls and floor. The smell of scorched metal filled the air. The Sarek pressed forward, their formation tight and disciplined. Lucas felt the weight of each shot he took, the recoil biting into his wounded chest. But adrenaline pushed him on. One of the Sarek tried to flank them, but Avara pivoted and brought it down before it could fire. They moved together without needing words, covering each other as the enemy advanced. The clash of voices and weapon fire made it hard to hear anything else, but Lucas caught the faint sound of more cutting tools working deeper in the ship. A sudden flash blinded them for a moment, and a blast wave knocked Lucas against the wall. His vision swam, but through the haze he saw Avara still standing, her weapon raised. She reached out to pull him back to his feet, her grip surprisingly strong. "We must fall back," she said. He nodded, forcing his body to move. Together they retreated toward the inner corridors, knowing the Sarek would follow until either they were stopped or the ship was lost. The inner corridors echoed with the pounding of boots as crew members rushed to reinforce the bulkheads. Lucas and Avara moved quickly, their weapons ready. The lights above flickered as the ship absorbed more impacts from enemy fire. The air smelled faintly of ozone from discharged weapons, and the floor beneath them trembled in short bursts. Every step felt like it was carrying them deeper into a fight they could not avoid. They passed a group of engineers sealing a hatch with emergency welders. Sparks lit the narrow space, throwing sharp shadows across the walls. One of the engineers glanced at Avara, eyes widening briefly before returning to his work. Her presence seemed to draw attention even in the middle of chaos. Lucas noticed it too, the way people seemed to sense she was the reason the Sarek were here. It made him walk even closer to her side. The captain's voice came through the com again, issuing sharp orders for the crew to block the Sarek advance at Section 12. Lucas knew that was close to the engineering core. If they reached it, they could disable the ship entirely. He and Avara adjusted their route, pushing toward the choke point. The sounds of gunfire grew louder, mixed with the guttural shouts of the Sarek warriors. The battle was already raging ahead of them. They emerged into a wide junction where human soldiers had taken cover behind overturned crates and armored barriers. Laser bolts streaked through the air, carving glowing scars into the walls. A sergeant waved them over, his eyes narrowing when he saw Avara. "Keep her out of the line," he barked. Lucas ignored the order and took position beside him, firing toward the advancing Sarek. Avara crouched low, returning precise bursts of fire. The enemy came in waves, their armor deflecting some of the incoming shots. Lucas focused on weak points, aiming for the gaps at the joints. Beside him, Avara moved with a fighter's instinct, using the chaos to position herself where her shots would count the most. Despite their efforts, the Sarek kept pushing forward, step by step. The sergeant called for heavier fire, and a crewman brought up a portable cannon that shook the floor when it fired. The blast tore through the front line of the Sarek, sending 2 of them sprawling, but the rest did not hesitate. They returned fire, forcing the defenders to duck lower behind cover. Lucas felt a sudden heat near his arm as a shot grazed the wall beside him. Avara reached out, pulling him down just in time to avoid another bolt that scorched the air where his head had been a second before. They traded fire for what felt like an eternity, the noise of battle drowning out all other thought. Then, without warning, a loud metallic groan echoed through the chamber. One of the bulkheads at the far end began to give way under the Sarek's cutting tools. Sparks and smoke poured from the edges as they worked to open another path. Lucas knew that if they broke through there, the defenders would be surrounded. He shouted to the sergeant, who quickly redirected part of the defense toward the weakening bulkhead. Avara moved with them, firing at any target that showed through the opening gap. The heat from the cutting tools made the air shimmer. The smell of burning metal was thick and heavy. Then, with a final screech, the panel fell inward, and more Sarek warriors surged through the breach. The fight turned desperate. Blaster fire lit the room in flashes of red and white. Lucas felt the recoil of every shot deep in his injured chest. But he refused to slow down. Avara stayed close, her weapon never still. She moved with controlled precision, and he realized she was fighting not just for herself, but for the entire crew. The defenders began to give ground, retreating step by step toward the next line of barricades. Finally, the sergeant shouted for a full fallback. Lucas and Avara covered the retreat, firing until the last soldier was clear. They slipped behind the next set of sealed doors, the heavy metal slamming shut just as the Sarek reached it. The sudden silence after the battle was almost as loud as the fighting had been. Lucas leaned against the wall, breathing hard, while Avara stood beside him, her eyes still locked on the door as if expecting it to break open again at any second. The sealed doors held for the moment, but everyone in the corridor knew it was only a matter of time. Soldiers reloaded their weapons, engineers checked the integrity of the bulkheads, and the hum of emergency systems filled the air. Lucas leaned against the wall, feeling the ache in his chest with every breath. Avara stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the door as though she could see through the thick metal to the enemies beyond. The sergeant approached them, his face lined with exhaustion. "You two bought us enough time to reset the defenses," he said. "But the captain wants you in the command deck now." Lucas exchanged a quick glance with Avara before nodding. They set off through the narrow corridors, stepping over discarded gear and debris from earlier fighting. The ship groaned occasionally as if it too was feeling the strain of the battle. When they reached the command deck, the captain was standing before a wide tactical display. The map showed multiple red markers closing in from different angles. "They are coordinating," the captain said without looking up. "They want to drive us into a trap." His tone was grim, but his eyes were sharp. Avara stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke. "If they are this determined, it is because of me." The captain finally looked at her. "That much is obvious," he said. "What I need to know is why." Avara's expression remained unreadable, but Lucas could see the flicker of something in her eyes, hesitation, or perhaps reluctance. "There are things about the Serac you do not understand," she said. "And if I tell you, it will place all of you in even greater danger." Her words only deepened the tension in the room. Lucas stepped forward. "We're already in danger," he said. "If there's something we need to know to survive this, you have to tell us." For a long moment, Avara said nothing. Then she drew in a breath and spoke. "I am not simply someone they want to capture. I am the heir to the Eridan line, the only one who can unite the Serac under a single rule. If they take me, they will use my bloodline to legitimize a war that will never end." The captain's jaw tightened. "That explains their persistence," he said, "and it means we can't let them take you alive." Avara met his gaze without flinching. "I will not be taken," she said. Lucas felt the weight of her words and the steel in her tone. This was not a promise made lightly. The captain began issuing rapid orders to the crew, redirecting resources to protect their path to the Eridan outpost. As the crew moved to carry out their orders, the ship shuddered violently. The lights flickered and alarms wailed through the corridors. "They've breached another section," a crewman shouted. The captain turned to Lucas and Avara. "You're heading to the escape corridor. If the ship falls, you get her out." Lucas nodded without hesitation. Avara opened her mouth to protest, but the captain cut her off. "This is not a request." They moved quickly through the twisting passages, the sound of distant gunfire echoing toward them. Lucas kept his weapon ready, scanning each intersection. Avara stayed close, her steps light and silent. The air was thick with the metallic scent of damage, and occasional sparks fell from overhead conduits. Every turn felt like it might be the one where they ran straight into the enemy. When they reached the escape corridor, 2 guards stood ready by the reinforced hatch. One of them handed Lucas an extra power cell for his rifle. "You're going to need this," the guard said. Lucas took it and checked his weapon again. Avara moved to the small viewport, looking out at the distant scatter of stars. Her expression was calm, but her hands tightened slightly at her sides. A sudden clang reverberated through the walls, followed by the muffled roar of explosions. The guards tensed, weapons aimed at the far end of the corridor. Lucas felt his pulse quicken as the noise grew louder. Avara turned toward him, her eyes steady. "No matter what happens, you cannot let them take me," she said. Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. Lucas gave a short nod, and they both turned to face the direction of the coming fight. The corridor trembled as the sounds of battle drew closer. Every step of the approaching Serac echoed through the metal floor like a drumbeat. Lucas tightened his grip on his rifle, adjusting his stance so he could react instantly. Avara moved to stand beside him, her weapon angled toward the far end of the passage. The 2 guards by the hatch exchanged a brief glance, silently bracing themselves for what was coming. The first Serac appeared around the corner, its crimson-marked armor glinting in the dim light. Lucas fired immediately, the bolt striking the creature's chest plate. It staggered but kept moving forward until a second shot from Avara pierced the gap under its arm. The warrior fell heavily, but more were coming behind it. The corridor, lit with streaks of plasma fire as both sides unleashed a barrage. The air filled with the sharp smell of burning metal. One of the guards went down with a shout, his armor smoking from a direct hit. Lucas and Avara shifted to cover the gap, their fire synchronized without needing words. Avara's precision was flawless, every shot placed to cripple or kill. Lucas fought through the pain in his chest, focusing on each target until it fell. The noise was deafening, but he could still hear the heavy footsteps of more enemies pushing forward. An explosion rocked the floor beneath them, knocking Lucas against the wall. He shook off the dizziness and found Avara still standing firm, her weapon blazing. She spared him a quick glance, her eyes locking with his for a heartbeat, before returning to the fight. It was a silent promise. She was not leaving without him. Lucas pushed back into position, firing at another Sarek who tried to rush the hatch. The surviving guards shouted over the gunfire. "We can't hold them much longer." Lucas knew he was right. They needed to fall back to the escape pods before the corridor was overrun. "Move!" Lucas yelled, covering the guard as he sprinted to the hatch controls. Avara fired beside him, her shots forcing the enemy to slow their advance. The hatch opened with a hiss, and they began their retreat toward the launch bay. As they moved, a plasma bolt struck the wall inches from Avara's head. She ducked and returned fire without hesitation, taking down the shooter. Lucas stayed behind her, watching every angle. The launch bay was a wide chamber lined with sleek pods, their doors open and systems powered. The surviving guard rushed to one and began activating the launch sequence. "Get in," he ordered, his voice urgent. Avara hesitated for a moment, scanning the room. "Where is the pilot?" she asked. The guard shook his head. "There isn't one. You'll have to fly it yourselves." Lucas moved to the controls, quickly assessing the basic layout. He had trained for emergency evacuation, but never with someone like Avara beside him. She slid into the co-pilot's seat, her hands already moving over unfamiliar switches, as though she had done this 100 times before. The sound of Serac footsteps thundered into the bay. Lucas fired through the open hatch, forcing them back for a few precious seconds. Avara's voice was calm as she called out system statuses. "Engines active, shields holding, we're ready." Lucas gave a short nod, then stepped inside and sealed the pod. The hatch locked with a heavy clang, and the controls lit up with launch confirmation. Through the small viewport, Lucas saw the first wave of Sarek reach the bay. Their weapons fired in unison, striking the pod's shields and sending ripples of light across the exterior. Avara's hands moved with precision, guiding the pod systems toward the release clamps. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the cabin. Lucas gripped the side panel as the pod disengaged from the ship and shot into the void. The stars filled the viewport, cold and sharp against the blackness of space. Behind them, the main ship was still under heavy attack, flashes of light marking the battle. Avara leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the navigation readout. "We must reach the Eridan outpost before they intercept us," she said. Lucas nodded, his focus already shifting to the empty expanse ahead. The fight was far from over, and both of them knew the Sirak would follow until one side was destroyed. The escape pod sped through the void, its engines burning bright against the darkness. Inside, the hum of the systems was the only constant sound apart from their breathing. Lucas kept his eyes on the sensors, watching for any sign of pursuit. The readout showed multiple blips gaining distance behind them. The Sarek ships were already closing in. Avara worked the navigation controls, plotting a course that would take them through a narrow asteroid field. "It will slow them down," she said. Lucas nodded, adjusting the shields for impact resistance. The pod wasn't built for long travel or heavy fighting, but it could survive if they moved fast and smart. Every second counted now, and both of them knew it. The first asteroids appeared ahead, tumbling slowly in the void. Lucas guided the pod into the field, weaving between massive slabs of rock. The hull groaned each time they passed too close, and fragments scattered off the shields in bursts of light. Behind them, The pursuing blips shifted formation, breaking apart to follow through the hazards. The chase had turned into a dangerous race through stone and space. Avara's focus never wavered. She scanned for the largest clusters and directed Lucas toward them. "If we use their mass, the Surak will have to split even further," she explained. Lucas adjusted their path accordingly, darting between shadows and bursts of light from shield impacts. He could feel the tension in his hands, every movement precise, every mistake potentially fatal. The pod shook under the strain but kept moving. A sudden warning flashed on the console. One of the Surak ships had found a faster route and was cutting across their trajectory. Lucas cursed under his breath and pushed the engines harder. The pod vibrated violently, alarms blaring as they skirted dangerously close to a spinning asteroid. The massive rock passed just meters away, its surface scored by centuries of impacts. The ship's shields flared, holding under the pressure. Avara glanced at the sensors. "We will not outrun them like this," she said. Her voice was steady, but Lucas heard the edge of urgency beneath it. "Then we make them back off," he replied. He checked the limited weapon system, a small pulse cannon meant for deterrence rather than battle. "Target their sensors," Avara suggested. "Blind them, and they will lose their advantage." Lucas aimed carefully and fired. The blast struck true, sending a ripple of static across the pursuing ship's readings. It wavered, losing speed as it tried to regain control. The other Surak vessels closed in, but the delay gave Lucas and Avara a slim lead. They pushed deeper into the asteroid field, the rocks growing denser and more unpredictable. The pods' shields sparked again as debris scraped across them. Finally, the last of the blips began to fade from the immediate sensors. The dense rock formations had forced the enemy to slow down. Lucas eased the engines just enough to keep moving without burning them out. Avara leaned back slightly, her eyes still scanning the controls. "We bought time but not safety," she said. Lucas knew she was right. The Surak would not stop until they reached the Eridan outpost or were destroyed. The pod cleared the asteroid field and emerged into open space once more. Far ahead, faint readings showed the outer patrol range of Allied forces. Lucas set a course toward them, hoping the signal would be received. Avara's gaze softened slightly as she looked at the faint markers on the screen. "If we make it there, the Council can protect us," she said. Her tone carried a note of hope, but it was guarded. Lucas glanced at her, remembering the moment she had told him the truth about who she was. Everything had changed since then, the mission, the risks, and the reason he kept standing between her and danger. He didn't know what waited for them at the outpost, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter how many times the Surak came for her, they would have to go through him first. The faint patrol signals on the sensors grew stronger as the escape pod cut through the open stretch of space. Lucas kept his eyes on the readings, adjusting their course to keep them on the fastest route. Avara sat beside him, her posture straight, but her hands resting lightly on the console. She was quiet now, watching the distant glow of the outpost grow brighter with every passing minute. The comms crackled with static before a clear voice came through. "Unidentified craft, you are entering Eridan patrol space. State your identity." Lucas replied quickly, identifying himself and explaining the situation. The voice on the other end responded with urgency, directing them toward a docking corridor. Relief flickered across Avara's face, but it didn't erase the wariness in her eyes. She knew the danger wasn't over until they were safely inside. The outpost came into view. Its sleek towers and shield arrays reflected the light of the nearby star. Lucas had never seen it before, but even from this distance it looked like a fortress. The docking lights began to flash, guiding them toward the entrance. Avara leaned forward slightly, scanning the surrounding space. "They are still out there," she said quietly. Lucas glanced at the sensors and saw the blips returning to the edge of range. He pushed the pod harder, feeling the engines strain. The outpost loomed larger until it filled most of the viewport. Over the comms, a patrol ship's captain promised to cover their approach. Moments later, streaks of light from defensive batteries cut across space, forcing the pursuing Sirach to scatter. For the first time since they had launched the pod, Lucas allowed himself to believe they might make it. The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thud and the hatch hissed open. Armed guards waited on the other side, their armor gleaming under the hangar lights. Avara stepped out first, her presence drawing immediate attention. The commander of the guard bowed his head slightly in respect. "Princess Avara, we have been expecting you," he said. Lucas followed her out, still holding his rifle in case the Sirach had managed to slip through. They were escorted through the outpost's main corridor to the council chamber. The tall doors opened to reveal a wide room lined with representatives from various allied species. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken decisions. Avara walked to the center and addressed them directly. "The Sirach will not stop. They will use my capture to unite their forces under a war banner. We must act before it is too late." One of the council members turned to Lucas. "You risked your life to protect her," the elder said. "Why?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "Because it was the right thing to do," he replied. His voice was steady, and he meant every word. The council chamber was silent for a moment, before several members exchanged nods. The commander of the guard stepped forward and confirmed their support for defending her at all costs. Outside the chamber, Avara paused beside Lucas. "You could have walked away at any point," she said, "but you stayed." He gave her a small smile. "I told you before, I'm not letting them take you." She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Then it is my turn to stand for you." Her words carried the weight of a vow, and Lucas knew she meant it. The alarm sounded again, this time from the outer defenses. The Sirach had returned in force, their ships forming a blockade around the outpost. Lucas and Avara moved quickly, with the guard to the defense command center. Outside the massive viewports, space lit up with the flashes of weapons fire. This time, the fight would not be about running. It would be about holding the line. Lucas stood at the firing console, aiming the outpost's weapons alongside trained gunners. Avara coordinated the defensive patterns with the commander, her voice calm but commanding. Together, they directed the full power of the outpost against the enemy. The battle raged for what felt like hours until finally the Sirach ships broke formation and retreated into the dark. The outpost stood intact, and for the first time, victory felt certain.